Hi, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Perspectives. I'm Deborah Kan, founder of Being Patient. Today, we're going to talk about dementia related to sports, in particular CTE, which we hear a lot of athletes getting diagnosed with years after they've played a sport, especially professionally. Well, joining me today is Stephen Barbieri. He joins us from Modesto, California. He is a martial arts guru, for lack of a better word, Stephen. And you played Taekwondo, is that right?
Yeah, I practiced it. We don't say play, but yes, I trained in Taekwondo, yes.
And tell us a little bit about that career. What age did you start to play? Because I have athletes that play soccer and rugby, I always say practice Taekwondo.
Actually, I started back in high school. I used to get picked on in school by some of the guys. I was able to talk to the girls a little bit easier, so I was getting picked on. So I figured I needed to try and learn how to protect myself a little bit better. So I started taking Taekwondo at, I think, the age of 16. So I've been doing it for 43 plus years. And then I realized that for a lot of people, that's hard to make a living, doing martial arts. So I ended up, I was a banker with Wells Fargo Bank as a career for 32 years, but martial arts was always a part of my life, and even more now that I've been retired from the bank.
So we'll come back to today and how you still practice martial arts, but I want to know, when you were practicing Taekwondo, did you take a lot of hits to the head?
Yes, and that was, I trained back in the mid 70s where there wasn't headgears, there wasn't the hand chops and things like that. Those were just coming out. When we used to train, we basically you had a mouthpiece and a cup. That was how we trained at our school. So, and in Taekwondo, it's a Korean style, a lot of kicking. And so it was almost like an insult to kick below the waist, kick them in the legs, which they do nowadays for different types of, MMA. But so ours was a lot of kicks to the body, and, you wanted to kick to the head because that was even a better opportunity, a better shot. So even in classes training on a regular basis, I was there 5 days a week. If you did the sparring, you're going to get kicked in the head. And there was, like I said, you had no pads on your feet at that time, and you had no headgear. Now, if you go to tournaments, they have the mouth guards, the headgear, the pads on the feet, the pads on the hands. It's much more organized and, safety things for the kids and stuff. And they don't really encourage, the hard, fast kicks to the heads anymore.
So do you remember getting concussions a lot, or was it just that you got hit really hard? And was there any concussion protocol back then?
No, that's that's kind of like a new word that, you hear concussion protocol. That wasn't even around, I don't think 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, let alone 30 something years ago when I was really, starting to train and I was in that was higher level of competition. So there wasn't, you'd get kicked in the head and they would do like they did to the old football players, a little smelling salt, wake you up and are you okay? And of course you would say yes, and you'd get back in there. Or if you got, kicked at the school, that smelling salt hit you to the side and they, asked you to rotate back in or whatever so that you wouldn't, like falling off a horse, you wouldn't be afraid to get back in there and go at it again. So there were several times in tournaments I got hit in the head as well as hit people in the head. And then I hit my head on a diving board when I dove in high school, just a bad diving accident. I was in a car accident where I hit my head. I got hit by a car. So there's been a lot of things throughout my life where I've had concussions or head injuries. But like I said, doing martial arts all those years back in the day when they didn't have concussion protocols or safety gear, I suffered probably a lot of minor concussions as well as, full-blown concussions.
So you were given, like a lot of people with different types of dementia are given an early onset Alzheimer's. I mean, first, I'm presuming you were told you might have been told you had MCI, only later to be told you have early onset Alzheimer's. Tell us about the time when you noted something wasn't quite right.
Well, that's the thing, is that as a person with the disease, you're not going to notice it. So that's why it's tougher for somebody who's living alone to really get a diagnosis, because you don't see those changes happening to yourself. The way it was happening was with my wife and myself. My wife and I used to argue a lot about things, and they really seemed to revolve around her telling me to do something and me not doing it. Well, that sounds like a normal husband, but that wasn't the case. Like one day she asked me to pick up the girls from school. I was leaving town for Fresno, and I thought I told her that, and she said that I told her I would pick up the girls. All of a sudden at 3:00, she gets a phone call at work saying the girls haven't been picked up. She calls me, and then I say, well, I'm in Fresno. She says, well, you didn't tell me that. And I go, yes, I did. And I go, you didn't tell me to pick up the girls. And we get in a big argument. Well, yes, I did. And da-da-da-da. Finally, she says, you know what? I'm going to have your hearing checked. And that's basically how my diagnosis all started with a hearing test. I did find my left ear was just, a little off. But then during the conversation, they were asking me things, and then they had to repeat, instructions or whatnot. So they started doing some minor cognitive testing, and then they did the EEG and the CTE, all the different, scans and things on my brain. So it's strange. Like a lot of people, my diagnosis changed. So the first one, because I was in a high stressful job at Wells Fargo Bank, I was the vice president, district manager, in charge of 12 offices, one of the largest districts within our company area. And I was having problems remembering things and forgetting things. So there was just a lot going on in my life at that time.
So how did you do on the cognitive test? And when did you make the association that it was cognition and actually memory?
That when they first did the test, the test they did was, it's funny, it's draw a clock and it's always at 11:10. And when I did a clock and it looked really bad and it wasn't specific enough, now I could do it in my sleep, because when I failed so badly, I went home and drew clocks for days. But I couldn't draw the clock very well. Then there's the old thing about remember these 5 words. And they would say, and then, random words, there was no connection to them. And then they distract you and they come back 5 minutes later. I never could remember all 5. Like a lot of people, I remember the first one and the last one and never could get the ones in the middle. Sometimes if they coached me enough, like, was it this one or that one? I might be able to remember. But if they could just say, can you tell me those 5 words? I couldn't remember. And so one test led to another test, led to another test. Same thing with my diagnosis. My first diagnosis, because in a high stressful job at the bank, was pseudo dementia. So when they said pseudo dementia, my wife and I looked at each other and said, well, what does that mean? Because again, we hadn't done any self-education. Well, pseudo dementia is based on stress or lack of vitamins like vitamin D or magnesium. So it's correctable. So when the neurologist explained that to us, we had high hopes. That was my initial diagnosis, was pseudo dementia. Well, then as time went along and testings went along, she changed it and went from pseudo dementia then to mild cognitive impairment. And then they did all kinds of other different tests, the EEGs and CAT scans and stuff. And they finally did the PET scan. And with the PET scan, they could find the damage on both sides of my temporal lobe and some in the front. So, of course, they thought frontotemporal lobe dementia. Well, the problem is nobody sat down and had like a life conversation with me, because, again, they heard about me doing martial arts for 40-something years and hitting my head in diving boards as they interviewed me. But nobody asked me, they saw me coming in a suit and tie as a banker. So they just assumed I was a banker, not knowing about doing all these other things, martial arts for 40 years. So somebody finally sat down and had like a life conversation for 45 minutes with me and went, oh my goodness, you're a classic CTE. And again, some people out there, or as you read, they say there's no way to properly diagnose somebody. The only other way is to do an autopsy, and I'm not ready for that test yet. So I'd say I'm clinically aligned for CTE, because you cannot get a 100% diagnosis of that alive.
So, and why is that? Why can't you? Because if you do a CT scan, did you get a PET scan, did you say, ever, or no?
Yes, that was the final thing, was the PET scan showed the damages and stuff. And that's when they had to stop doing the searching, because that definitely locked it in. But it confused them, because it was on my temporal lobes and my frontal lobe. They thought the frontal temporal lobe, because nobody had done that conversation, finding out that I'd done martial arts, because I was showing up on appointments as a suit and tie on my way home from the bank or taking a long lunch or something.
So they didn't see any plaques in your hippocampus, the part where you remember it was mainly in the frontal cortex region of your brain, the
Yes.
front two lobes. And I can understand why, because that's usually associated with frontal temporal lobe dementia, right? Which
Right.
We hear really impacts behavior. People will act inappropriately, or if they have FTD. Was it like that for you at all? Were you getting more angry than usual, or were you exhibiting strange, out of character behaviors?
My wife is off camera and she's shaking her head saying, yes, 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 with a big smile. A lot of my friends noticed because, the way I was raised and brought up and stuff, I never swore. My friends never heard me, cuss or whatever. All of a sudden words were coming out and people were, friends of mine that would swear all the time, but when they heard me say, they're like, what? And my wife would see me get upset or grouchy a little bit faster and whatnot. And she knew me not as a violent or aggressive person. So those types of personality changes. And then I try and use a conservative phrase. My wife and my daughter say something different, but at the dinner table, I don't want to say, they say inappropriate, but I say things and do things and I'm silly in a weird, strange way sometimes, which is not my personality.
So why is it though, if they can see the plaques and where they are, they can't tell you 100% that you have CTE?
Because it's not plaques they're seeing. So the original PET scan I had was a traditional PET scan. And believe it or not, there's actually an amyloid plaque PET scan that you can have as well. I actually had one of those probably about a year or so ago, and it didn't show any of the plaques. So in my type of dementia, I don't have plaques. So what my, what's the word? The trademark for my type of disease is the tau protein. Right. So the tau protein is what they could see because there was no amyloid plaque, because they actually tested me to see if maybe I had what's called dual dementia, where I had CTE as well as Alzheimer's, and the PET scan, the amyloid PET scan showed no amyloid. So I don't have the Alzheimer's. My type of dementia is the CTE, is what they believe based on lifestyle.
So you've said before we started this interview, you said that you didn't feel like getting a dementia diagnosis was the end of life for you. I mean, there's still ways to improve your health and keep living. So tell us a little bit about how you've changed according to being diagnosed with CTE, how you've really changed your lifestyle.
Yeah, I try and tell people all the time, once you get a diagnosis, it's not a death sentence or whatever. For me, it's an awakening. A lot of people hit pause on their life. I always tell everybody, I didn't hit pause. I hit fast forward on my life. So again, I've done a lot of changes. The biggest thing I started doing was going to the gym on a regular basis and, lifting that heavy weight, getting that cardio in. So I work out at the gym 4 days a week for a little over 2 hours. I start by running about a mile and a half, heavy weightlifting, get that pump, get that oxygen to the brain every day. Then on Fridays, I make sure I go out and see a lot of martial art friends. We actually have a club, a group of us that we call Coffee with the Masters. So we have people from all over the areas that come and have coffee with us and stuff. And so I make sure I've got the social engagement. My wife made sure that my eating improved, because I had a sweet tooth, and if you realize when somebody gets dementia, they end up getting what's called a super sweet tooth. So she had to really watch to make sure I stayed away from the sweets and was eating more of my greens, which I didn't care for greens as much. And I never was a big meat eater. So again, we stay with fish and chicken and things. So she made sure I stayed on the healthy, and I avoided that ice cream at night, those candy bars during the day, the donuts on the weekend. She made sure I cut those things out. So it was a big lifestyle change. It's similar to when somebody gets diagnosed with, what does Mike have? Diabetes. You have to stop doing sugar or whatnot. That's why when I meet other people that have dementia, I'm asking them a lot of questions, because a lot of the people I find out have dementia, they haven't made any lifestyle changes. That's my question to them. So what do you do once you got the diagnosis? And they look at me like, well, what do you mean? And I go, well, do you go to the gym? Do you take supplements? Are you doing this? And they're like, no, I just sleep a lot or something. And so it's it's like when you get those diagnoses, you've got to do that lifestyle change. I mean, I don't go to the gym for 2 hours a day on Monday through Thursday because I love it. I do it because that's part of my protocol, my process. I take my supplements. I try and get some sleep. I've actually stopped taking my Aricept 2 years ago because of the side effects and went to CBD oil that keeps me level throughout the day. It took my wife and friends like 2 years because I didn't smoke or do drugs or anything to understand that CBD isn't like smoking and getting high. So I take that now daily, and that was life changing as it is. And I'm in a clinical trial in UCSF up in San Francisco, and when I was going through the what's it called? The interview to get into it, my wife says, I just have one question. She got on the phone. She goes, if he has to get off this CBD, he's not coming in that clinical trial with you guys because it has.
Did you notice? Well, tell us a little bit about that. How did CBD, because we get comments all the time on Being Patient about CBD. And we've even interviewed scientists who are starting to study the impact of CBD on people diagnosed with dementia. We don't have the data yet because it's early days in the studies to make any kind of conclusive analysis. But I'm curious, from your personal perspective, you started taking CBD on a daily basis, is it? And what changed?
So every day, like a lot of people with dementia, you get tired. Like it's like your battery on your cell phone dies out and you got to recharge. I'd have to go in a back room, say from 2 o'clock to 3:30 or so for an hour or 2 hours in a dark room, basically to recharge my brain. It wasn't like my body was tired. My mind was like overworked. So I used to tell people like your cell phone, you could have the best cell phone, but when the battery dies, the only thing you can do is recharge it. I needed to go in that back room. So now when I come home from the gym about 11ish or so, I get in the shower and I put the CBD underneath my tongue. And I have a friend that makes a very special mixture for me where it's got a tiny 0.3 of THC in it to help get through the brain barrier better. So basically what it does is it doesn't get me high because it's not that THC. It's like vanilla. It just keeps me on the level playing field. So I don't have to take the nap. My mind doesn't get overly tired. And because I'm not napping during the day, now at night, people with dementia have broken sleep. You're up every couple of hours. That's why I used to do all my research about all my diseases and reading and stuff. It was because I wasn't sleeping. Now I take something called TCHA. So the THC is what gets you high. And by lighting a match, the heat opens it up. Well, this is THCA that has to stay refrigerated, which then it eliminates the high of it. So it's more of a total relaxation. So the CBD gets me through the day. And then I take a very small amount of THCA right before bed. And in about 15 or 20 minutes with a small CBD chocolate that's got a little bit of melatonin in it as well, I sleep for 7 hours. So again, that's another thing with people with dementia, that broken sleep. So if you're not sleeping at night, the average person is going to get grouchy. Well, somebody with dementia, not only are going to get grouchy, but your brain's going to have less, they call it that brain fog of not being able to focus. So again, it works differently on different people. It works great for me. My wife says it's a life-changing thing. So I've been using it for about 4 or 5 years now.
So it's interesting. I mean, I'm glad that science is finally looking at this because we have people like you who say that it really does work. And we should say, you live in a state where marijuana is legalized, so it's easy for you to access good supply. Right. And there are people out there who don't. And, by any means, we're not really advocating that people just go out and try to find CBD, THC. I assume you had recommendations from people who are well versed, and
Yes.
I mean, and consulted your doctor before you did so.
Yes, and the strange thing is when you say consulted my doctor, because it's not licensed in all the states, and I go to Kaiser, where Kaiser's not just in California. So the chief neurologist I see, because of my early age of dementia, I've seen the chief neurologist. She can't talk about it because it's not legal in all the states where Kaiser is at. So even though it's legal in California, she can't initiate the conversation. So when we brought it up about getting off the Aricept because of the side effects, she says, yes, a lot of my patients are using CBD. So when I introduced the conversation, she could then have that conversation. She says a lot of her patients are going that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually, I can't wait for the research to tell us, I mean, we hear from people like you all the time that they are using CBD and it is helping. So I wanted to ask you though, one of the things you told me earlier is that you still practice martial arts, right? And
Yes.
I think a lot of people would be surprised by that because martial arts was one of the reasons why it could, potentially be a reason why you have dementia. So tell us a little bit about the role martial arts plays in your life today.
Well, it was really because of the contact. So again, you can practice and train in martial arts without that contact. So that's why there's the punching bags. That's why there's the form, which is like an art of dancing, where you see practitioner, doing certain techniques at different things. I used to compete in the forms competition as well as the fighting, and I also do open kata, where you do a form to music or whatnot and stuff. Where I used to do aerial cartwheels and flip flops and jumping, spinning hook kicks and whatnot. So I still train and stretch and work out. And actually, I have several friends that have martial arts studios or dojangs. And actually, I go over there as a guest instructor and I teach at different things. But again, I'll work with students on their kicking techniques or whatnot. But I don't physically kick somebody in the head and I don't get kicked. I don't do the sparring part of it anymore. And another part is I got into boxing, which I do on Tuesdays now, and I'm actually up to 10 rounds. It took me 4 years to get up to 10 rounds, but I do 10 rounds of mitt work where I have a coach calling out different boxing combinations, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And as soon as I get a good combination, he'll change it on me, or he'll tease me and put up his one hand and tell me a 2. And I'll hit it. And he's like, no, I would have put that other hand up. So he's working my body as well as my mind. But my wife says you can do all that you want, just no contact. And like I said, you can still train in martial arts without the contact. And that's what I do.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you were diagnosed around 50 years old. Is that right?
I was diagnosed at the age of 51, 2 months before my 52nd birthday. So I've been diagnosed.
And now you're 58 or 59?
59 tomorrow. It's my birthday
happy
tomorrow.
Birthday.
Thank you.
So tell me, in the years that you have been from diagnosis to now, living with dementia, tell me a little bit about, have you noticed a change? Have the lifestyles helped the progression? Do you feel like you're getting better, worse? Where are you on the spectrum?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm pretty happy where I'm at after 8 years because, again, if you do a lot of reading when they talk about dementia, typically they say life existence is 8 years to 20 years. But again, most people they don't get that early diagnosis. So again, an early diagnosis is so important. So I was very fortunate with that early diagnosis. But in the 8 years that I've had the disease as of last month, I'm still, I consider myself still highly functionable. I don't drive at night because I'm just not as confident. I have the word finding problems all the time. If you notice during our conversation, I close my eyes a lot. I have a dementia coach, and that was one of the techniques. It allows me to find the words a little bit easier because my brain is bouncing around trying to find that word. My smell and my taste, they don't work very well anymore. So I have a hard time with food. So I start getting into routines to the point where I'll have peanut butter and jelly for 3 weeks in a row. And I have to have that every day for lunch just because it's a routine. And for some reason, it'll change into a salami sandwich. And right now, my wife's upset with me because it's Jamba Juice. I have their protein bowl, the strawberry protein bowl, where no matter where we're at, when I get around 1:30, I'm like, we got to find a Jamba Juice because people with dementia tend to get in routines, and it's easier just to stay in a routine on that. So over the years, there's been a lot of different changes, but I've been very fortunate that my wife has helped me with it, and we've created processes. I use my phone a lot too. I take a lot of pictures because for me, pictures are my trigger to my memory. We've had the opportunity to take many, many trips all over the world. We'll talk about Ireland, and I won't remember it. I pull out my phone, I'll start looking at photos. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember going to the Guinness place. I remember going to the south of Ireland. I remember going here or there. But for me, it's pictures help me trigger my memory.
Do you find that your short-term or long-term memory is impacted more, or both?
It's my short-term memory, like a lot of people. My long-term memory is fine. And actually, I'm in the clinical trial, like I said, in San Francisco. It's called Basket, the clinical trial for UCSF. And the clinical drug that I'm on right now, that I keep telling them on my interviews, I go monthly for my infusion, is I feel my memory is being opened up from the back coming forward. So I'll be laying in bed and all of a sudden I'll have weird memories that will just flood to my brain. Nothing I was thinking about. All of a sudden I could remember where I lived when I was a little kid, and every single neighbor, I could tell you this was Mrs. Jin's house. Brandy lived there. The Webbers lived there. The Thompsons here. The Lees here. I could remember all these people's names and faces, but I couldn't even remember what I had for lunch the day before. So when my wife was still working, she would constantly have to call me and say, "Did you have lunch?" And I got to the point where I started the fib to her, and she started saying, "Send me a picture of what you had for lunch." So because I would forget to have lunch a lot of days.
Yeah, smart wife.
Very blessed. I'm very blessed. She's off camera right now.
We hear that she's welcome to join us. We hear that a lot, though. That, I mean, the support of the partner is so essential in this process, right? And I feel like if you have a supportive partner, it's almost like your decline is less, which is proving to be the case, at least in the people who we talk to. And you can understand why too, because again, that social interaction, coming up with a plan as a couple is really important. It's a two, in tandem effort.
Yeah, she keeps me on pace, and it's funny because also it's hard with couples about getting the diagnosis. Because an example, when I went into the doctor to see a chief neurologist, and she was asking me questions and stuff, like a lot of couples, she would ask me a question and I didn't know the answer, and I would do this. I'd look over at Tracy and she'd answer. And then the doctor would say, and then we'd go on. She'd ask me questions and I'd answer. All of a sudden she'd get to another question. I wasn't sure if I'd do this. And Tracy would answer it. Not knowing we were doing it, all of a sudden the doctor says, "Tracy, I need you to just step outside for the next 15 minutes when I finish the interview." And then when she came back in, she explained, like, "What did I do wrong?" She goes, "You're answering half the questions that he couldn't answer." And she went, "Oh my goodness. I've been doing that for years." So couples, which is a good thing because you help each other out in that sense, but sometimes that's an aha moment that if you're covering for the person a little bit too often.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So how do you see the future, Stephen? Tell us a little bit about do you take this day to day, or what are you looking towards for the future?
Well, I try and live in the moment because you have today, and like they say, today's a present, and you should take advantage of the present and open it up. And so I do that, but at the same time, I do plan for the future. The thing that I look forward to planning are trips. Like when we do go to, like we've been to Europe, we've gone to Ireland, we've gone so many places I can't even remember, Greece and other places, but Tracy allows me to do all the planning of it. I do all the planning, I do the research, I look at the dates. Like a lot of people, I check the weather, what it's going to be that time of the year, whatnot, on different trips and whatnot. So I try and plan 3 to 4 trips a year. So I'm always looking towards the future. This year's almost over, so we're looking at either Croatia next year. We always go to Cabo in June. Our son's in Hawaii now, so we visited him a few months ago. We're looking to go back to Hawaii again. And then another one might be an African safari is a possibility. So I'm looking forward to planning those trips for next year.
Wow, that's a lot to look forward to. Absolutely. Well, we thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We've spoken about CTE in the past. It definitely falls in the umbrella of dementia. Diagnosis, I think, is a tricky one. Whether it's Alzheimer's or CTE for that matter, it seems getting to diagnosis is often a journey, no matter who you are. So we appreciate you sharing your story with us. And it's inspiring to hear that you're still, you're taking such good care of your health and being really proactive. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Deborah, for the opportunity to share my story today with you.
Do you document, is there a website you have or anything like that?
People know me. I use my Facebook on a daily basis. I post a lot of things, and people know that it's kind of like my diary. I post when I go to UCSF for my drug infusions. I'll post that. I'll post articles. I was excited to post that my drug has now been given a name, so it's even one step further about getting approved or whatnot. So again, if you want to, okay, Gosuranemab. It's Gosuranemab, and it's recently been in the news because I'm in phase 2, the second basket trial, and they're doing all the documentation about the first basket trial that's been very promising. I'm to the point where my clinical trial is through, and I'm actually on open label, so I'm getting the drug now on a monthly basis because it is showing such good promise, again, focusing on the tau protein.
Yeah, I always wonder why they give the names of these drugs like such bad names that you can never remember.
It's like they're connecting 5 doctors' names together or something.
Right. All right. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm definitely an inspiration. We'll definitely follow you on Facebook and check in with us again when you finish those trials, because we would love to hear firsthand how much improvement there's been and what the difference is. I mean, it's great to hear that there are trials out there where you feel you're getting better. So we'll definitely love to hear more about that in the future.
Thank you again. I really appreciate today.
Okay, take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.